this reminds me of something that just popped up for me a few days ago. And that was learning that while we strive for better behavior, we're human and old things can pop up unexpectedly. And I discovered that I have a check engine light on in me. And when that happens, I have two things that tell me about it. And I wrote about it and put it in our Facebook page the other day, but it's still talking to me. So I want to share. I find myself being mad over something I can't quite define. Did somebody really do something, or am I telling myself a story? And the other tell is an unsettling feeling in my stomach. And that is my check engine light. And when I hear it, it gives me an opportunity to stop and pause and look at what I'm really doing and pull back from it, make amends, and course correct. And it's actually a landmark for me to even know I have a check engine light that can come on today, because I didn't used to. I would just keep running in the story and take whatever prisoners I could along the way, you know? So I'm very grateful for this journey of emotional sobriety. It has changed my life, the lives of those around me, and I feel like has helped me reinforce my value system so I can live a life that's congruent with my beliefs.
Right on, right on. I love that check engine analogy. It's a nice,
Mm-hmm.
it's so important when we hit that thing is don't keep driving, stop. I mean,
Exactly. And man, I
stop,
used to
figure
drive
out
all.
what's going on. I mean, and how many of us have driven with a check engine light on? I mean,
I used to. I'd mow right over people with that, holding on to my story.
yep, yep.
And I I love more than I love my story. I love others more than I love my story today. I love myself more than I love my story.
See, that in itself right there is a wonderful description of emotional sobriety.
Thank you.
Wonderful description. That's never heard it put like that before, and I just love how you stated that. That makes so much sense to me.
That, and I want to thank you and Herb and Tom for 4 years solid of this journey of bringing all of us along with you with this lovely education and perspective. Thank you for your service to us. Thank you for teaching me. Thank
You're
you.
you're welcome, Carol. I appreciate that. I really
Makes a
do.
big difference to so
Well,
many of.
it's Tom and I kind of stumbled across this, in COVID, and we said, hey, we want to use, the pain and suffering and fear that everybody's going through to try to create a community where we could come together. And it had different starts and beginnings to it and podcast, and then it morphed into this, which has just been fantastic.
Yep.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, as those of you know, is that we are continuing our discussion of my book, 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety, which my dear friend and colleague Roger had mentioned would be a great, thing for us to cover and to elaborate on the chapters. And we happen to be on the chapter about forgiveness tonight. And I've spent several weeks talking about it, but if we think of emotional sobriety as self-regulation, then of course forgiveness has to be a part of that. It has to be discussed, has to be understood, and we have to kind of create an opportunity in our life to once again, we're searching for this emotional freedom, for emotional autonomy, and forgiveness is definitely a path to that. I heard a great analogy earlier today, or read a great analogy today, is that the sun will shine once the clouds get cleared away. Um, and it's so true, right? Um, the sun will shine, but we've got to get the clouds out of the way first. So with that, I'll turn this over to Herb. Herb, good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you so much. My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic, and I'm pleased to be here to share a little bit of my understanding and experience with forgiveness. And I've been doing a lot of work in the area for, quite frankly, over 30 years. I first developed an awareness of forgiveness back in 1989, 1990, when I was 5 or 6 years sober. But I never really understood the word forgiveness. It was only after I went through a process of inventory and then of amends in steps 8 and 9 that I was even aware that there was a dynamic there that had completely eluded me in any of the reading I'd ever done in psychology and or religion spirituality concerning forgiveness. It's one thing to read a book and to hear other people talk about it, but it's quite another thing to become aware of your own experiences of the bondage of non-forgiveness. The big book talks about resentment, which is the clearest example, I think, at least to me, of unforgiven. At some point, probably after I had done the work and mellowed a little bit in terms of being in the process of the 9th step, I was invited to look up the word forgiveness. And as I looked it up, the work that I had done and both understood and began to experience began to have a new experience with me, seeing the process of forgiveness as not an event, but literally a process, very parallel to the step process from 4 to 9. And I made that connection. I looked up the word in a dictionary, forgiveness. I was invited to be on a panel back in 1990 with Fred Luskin, Dr. Fred Luskin, who is a professor of psychology at Stanford University and wrote his PhD dissertation on the process of forgiveness. He had just published it. I had just read it because I was invited to be on the program with him to talk about forgiveness, he from the secular scientific standpoint, and me from the spiritual psychological standpoint, from the 12-step standpoint, really. And so I read his book, and as a result of that, it solidified not only the understanding, but then the experience of forgiveness that I had already had, but wasn't aware of the moving parts of it, just having done it based on receiving instructions from somebody else. Alan talked two things that were very, I think, gave direction to what I'm about to say, and that is, number one, the purpose of forgiveness is freedom. Now, it was motivated at the time by bringing freedom to other people through the 9th step amends. When I looked up the word forgiveness in the dictionary, it said to release. Look at my hand. A decision to release them. And that's such a wonderful gesture to capture the spirit of and sort of dissipate the mystery of what forgiveness is. A process in the big book that I understood eventually is impossible, no, by my own power. Bill dedicates a page and a half to I'm as powerless over forgiveness, letting go of my resentment, as I am over my addiction. No, powerless, no choice. I can understand it, I can want it, I can mimic the recommended behavior, but I can't release it, but it's a decision, and with my willingness to be able to release it. So he, in the big book, suggests prayer. Not prayer for them. You hear it all the time, and it's a wonderful spiritual practice. to pray for them, to pray for your enemies, to bring healing to the people, to pray that they receive the abundance that you want for yourself or that they want for them. All wonderful spiritual aspirations. I get it. I'm endorsing it. I'm supporting it. It's true. It's just not the recommendation in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The recommendation in the big book is I make a decision to get free, both of my addiction and of my unmanageability, by having a relationship, Alan talked about it, with that light that is deep inside of me, by removing or having removed the darkness in me. And I say it both ways. I make a decision to remove, realize then that I can't, but I'm willing to take the actions to have it removed. And then I hope that it will happen. My willingness to take the action somehow are the preconditions for the grace to allow it to happen. And the mystery is my willingness itself is a grace. I'm not even going to try to untangle that. But in the big book, it suggested that I pray for myself. I pray for my healing. I pray for my ability to release and be released. I make a decision knowing that I can't affect it. But I have a faith decision and a hope expectation to go with it, that power deep inside of me will bring healing to me as long as I cooperate with the willingness and the actions that go with it. The other point that Alan made, not perhaps as verbally as I'm going to do it, but he implied it, and that's consciousness. To the extent that I am aware, I'm free. If I don't know I have an option, I don't have it. To the extent that I know that I have an option, but only to that extent, I have the option. The more conscious I am that I have an option, the more options I have. Now, that's just common sense, and you can see it intuitively. Perhaps you have an experience with that. That's why the total point of the 12-step process is awakening, having had an awakening as the result of these steps, meaning consciousness, meaning awareness, self-consciousness, and aware of the deeper, higher self in me that is not me, but that is in me and is available to me as a untapped, unsuspected inner resource. Words from the big book for those of you who are in a 12-step program and familiar with the big book. Read Appendix 2. Unsuspected, tapped and unsuspected, like the oil well that drills down into deep down into the resource of the oil and brings it to the surface. In our case, digs down under the exact nature of the darkness in us, those instincts gone awry, the resentment, manifestation of anger, the anxiety, manifestation of fear, the shame, the manifestation of our desire to hide, to protect ourselves for survival, that camouflage. In the resentment area, I was able to see eventually over time, it took about 5 years and 2 different trips through the steps, that in the one aspect of it, I could see the beliefs that I had that were delusional. That's the story that was being talked about by Carol, reframing that story, understanding the unenforceable rules, the term from Dr. Luskin's work. His book is Forgive for Good. It captures the essence of his thesis on forgiveness. Easy to read. He wrote it for people who are lay people, not necessarily scientists or psychologists. But the words he uses are different than the big book words, but the process that he uncovered for forgiveness is the same process. The dynamic of the process, the method of the process is the same, the vocabulary is different. To acknowledge the reality. This is the most difficult part, and it was the most embarrassing part for me. To acknowledge the reality that my beliefs were delusional. To acknowledge the reality that my motives were corrupt. No, I'm using the word very definitely, intentionally. My motives were corrupt. I didn't know that. I thought I was well-intentioned. But underneath the exact nature of my motives, it was all about me. It was all about me. It was never about anybody else other than me looking better for other people, which was underneath about me. Acknowledging and then accepting the truth of reality. Bill calls it in some places humility. Humility is connecting to the principles of reality as we talk about in emotional sobriety. They're absolute. They're non-negotiable. They're immutable principles. Bill knew it intuitively. He didn't exercise much writing about it. He did say, practice these principles, and that was a synonym for steps in the big book. But he never gave us a list. He gave us some hints of these principles, but that's what we've been unpacking here in this weekly panel. In fact, formally, Dr. and Berger, I have made presentations of the principles that are connected to each of the steps. Underneath the step is a principle. Well, many different principles, of course. It's like a principle, the value proposition, the law, like gravity is a law of physics, immutable within the Earth's atmosphere, of course. Non-negotiable. It doesn't matter what I know, what I think, what I want, what I need, how I feel, what the circumstances are. The law of gravity prevails. The principles that Bill talks about, the key one is rigorous honesty. How it works, page 58, 2/3 of that page is about rigorous honesty. That's the underlying sine qua non, that's Latin for you can't do it without it. Principle of getting sober, staying sober, having a relationship with the life itself, with reality itself. I'll skip the word God and spirituality. You don't need it. I'm using synonyms, of course. To become conscious of the impact of my behavior on other people was devastating to me. 5 years sober, beginning to wake up and to see, number one, the delusional beliefs, and 3 years later, the corrupt motives, to see the impact of my behavior on other people in the 5th step, and especially in the 9th step, identifying all the harms that I had created to people, and then to get guidance over probably a 5 to 10 year period, 3 different times going through the steps, progressively unpacking, uncovering, discovering the harms that I had done, some not so subtle and some kind of subtle, or having implications that I don't see until I can see, because later on I'm more conscious. Because of the work progressively, the dimmer switch going up and the light getting brighter. My willingness to engage a step guide, a mentor, a teacher that would hold me accountable, that would give me suggestions and hold me accountable for the accuracy of my work and the consistency and diligency of doing it. Who would have experience in themselves making amends, bringing healing to other people, and having the paradoxical experience of bringing healing to themselves, and through this process of both the book on emotional sobriety, but on Nathaniel Branden's book on self-esteem, I became very aware of the need for self-forgiveness. And it dominates the people in the workshop at some point where they have developed some level of consciousness and healing themselves. And then an intentional process of releasing myself by some form of prayer practice as a spiritual mechanism, or some form of therapy as a therapeutic mechanism, or some form of action as a healing mechanism, perhaps going back to school to finish their high school, or to finish their college, or to finish their credentials in some area of career, or something that was nagging at them, a hole in their soul, or a cancer that had metastasized into a deep wound. Forgiveness. To become conscious that reality is. No judgment, just observe it, acknowledge it, and then accept it. This is real, incontrovertible, absolute, non-negotiable, immutable. And then for me to adjust to it. And to know that I can bring some healing to other people. That's the total point, from my standpoint, of the forgiveness process. The Lord's Prayer, written probably in the 1st century. Release them from their debts and you will be released. They understood the dynamic. Picked up in the 18th century, called the St. Francis prayer. St. Francis was in the 12th century, so he didn't write it. But somebody picked up the philosophy, spirituality of St. Francis and wrote this prayer and called it the St. Francis prayer. And he says very clearly in there twice, to the extent that we forgive them, we are forgiven. The paradox. To the extent that I admit powerlessness in step 1, I get power. To the extent that I jump off the cliff in the abyss of the faith decision that there is a power in reality that I can trust and have a relationship with, then I learn to fly. That's the total point. It's a metaphor that I got from my own spiritual director. It's a very awkward steps 4 through 9. Based on the faith decision, empty and invisible and dark of step 2, but then the hope in the turning and the commitment to turning, the commitment to take this action and finish the action through step 9, and we enter the world of the Spirit. These are words from the big book. Most of you know if you're familiar with the big book. Enter the world of the Spirit, leaving the world of self. Entering the world of light, leaving the world of darkness. A process that needs to be repeated. Step 10, 11, and 12. Wash, rinse, and repeat. Those first 9 steps, the program of recovery. The last 3 steps, the program of living. Dr. Berger calls optimal recovery, first 9 steps, optimal living, the last 3 steps. Neutrality from addiction, the first 9 steps. Neutrality from unmanageability. The biggest gift and the biggest promise and the most unplumbed secret in the 12-step rooms. I am invited to manage my life by partnership and relationship with life and my partnership and relationship with others. Read step 12 from the 12 and 12. And that's where Bill introduces those concepts. 1953, just when he was becoming very aware of emotional sobriety, he calls it partnership. Partnership with people and partnership with God. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, you're getting quite a head of steam going there. I saw the smoke coming out of your ears at one. But you know,
Exactly. The
we
little
get
train, the little train that could.
little train that could.
Hey, he wasn't preaching like Roger preaches.
Roger didn't get going on that, huh?
Roger, hallelujah. It's like, yeah.
I love it. Well, Tom, go ahead. Why don't you go and then
Well, I just got a piece that, and just this is, I mean, I love the thing I heard from Herb that I just kept, just the rinse and repeat. I love that. It's like, because it's, my thing is always about defining and developing and refining our daily practice of recovery. And, and that's one of the things I really love about what you wrote about here in the book, and what we talk about here is that forgiveness is not, forgiveness is not it's not an event, it's not a thing we do. It is, like we talked about last week. I think it was last week. We talked about the idea of, rather than say it's all about, I was saying the I forgive you means that sentence is about you. It's like you're the object, that you is the object of the verb. And the truth is, what we're trying to do is be forgiving and be able to do what Herb's talking about, which is release. And and we're human, so here's how we let things go. It's like, I got this card, I'm going to let it go. It's like, okay, yeah, let me put it down. It's like, no, I got it. Now I've let it go. It's like, and how many times do we have to work to let that go? I don't know, as often as we need to do that. It's like, in over a period of time, it's just like, it's like one day at a time, one more thing. It's like you do it over and over again. I read an author, guy who writes about stoicism. He says he calls it building a chain. And it's like, I've often, when I talk to people about what they want to build new habits, which this needs to be, is that he says, imagine that you chain one day of doing this to put that link of the chain to the next day, and he said ultimately you get a chain going. It's like our sober days in a way. You get a chain going, and you don't want to break the chain. So it just motivates you to keep trying to do that. It's the other thing I want to go to is just at the very beginning of the chapter. There's a phrase in here that I love, which is referring to the quotations at the beginning. They do a disservice to and this is the phrase I like, the genuine usefulness of forgiveness. It's a great sentence, because there's a phrase that you probably, I bet you that's one of those that probably doesn't exist. I'm a big fan of this, finding things that people say or describe that probably has never been said before, and that would be one of those things. I would be willing to bet you that's never been said before, to think of forgiveness in terms of genuine usefulness. And it's like, I love the practicality of that. And let me just finish with this. I often, we talk about this at different times, Alan, what we do for a living and how we describe it and how we define it. One of the ways I define what we do for a living is we bring people come to us, we listen carefully to them, and we listen for where they're stuck. That's what we're doing, because it's not like we don't need to change people. We need to get them out of their own way. We need to clear the clouds, is to talk about what you were talking about at first. It's like, get those clouds moving away. And in my favorite metaphor, because everybody knows I'm refusing to go to Metaphors Anonymous, is that and I'm sure there's a metaphor for that, but I don't know what it is right now. But it's my description of stuckness is you got a sailboat, you're sailing across the water, doing good, stuff like that, and you drop a big anchor, big heavy anchor. It's like that, that anchor can be many things, but for today's discussion, let's say that anchor is resentment. That anger, it's anger, it's resentment, it's anger. Anger is just a feeling, but it's anger pointed at something or somebody, and gets us. And what happens if you're in the sailboat and you drop the anchor? It's like what I know, I'm not a great sailor, but I know this much. If you're in deep enough water that the anchor does not hit the bottom, it slows you down quite a lot. But if you're in shallower water and you have your long chain and it hits the bottom, those sails just start flapping and you just go in a circle over and over and over again. And so I see us as what we're helping the people do is to discover where those anchors are and pulling them up. And it's like so we can move forward. And we can easily fit the idea of living a life of forgiveness, and that brings us back to that thing that I remember how confused I was the first time I heard it in the program. You don't forgive for the other person, you forgive for yourself. I mean, I just remember it was like, I mean, I was arrogant enough back then. I just assumed when people said stuff like that, they had misspoken. They didn't know that, he didn't know what he was saying. He meant to say, I was editing everybody, but it's like, it's one of the greatest gifts for me. It's like, it's letting that go, letting those go, releasing, like Herb's talking about, is bringing those anchors up so I can keep sailing, moving forward. And, yeah. That's that. Thank you, Herb. I really I enjoyed listening to what you had to say today.
Well, let me jump in here, and we still got a little time. I want to share with you a story about a Sufi master, and then we'll talk about its relevance to this subject. So a Sufi master had lost the key to his house and was looking for it in the grass outside of his house. Got down on his hands and knees and started running his fingers through every blade of grass, right? Fearing that if he missed one, he might miss where the key was at. Along came 8, maybe even 10 of his disciples, and they said, Master, 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 what is wrong? And the master looked up at them and said, I have lost the key to my house. They said, can we help you find it? He said, sure, I'd be delighted. I can use all the help I can get. There's a lot of grass out here, right? A lot of places that it could be lost. So they all got down on their hands and knees and they started running their fingers through the grass with him. Hopefully they were doing a systematic search through by quadrants, but I'm not so sure that they were thinking that way at that point in time. We learned that in the Marine Corps, by the way. You search through quadrants.
It's not a spiritual concept.
Search and destroy concept, but it actually turns out to
find the body concept.
But as the sun grew hotter, right, one of the more intelligent, or we could say maybe attuned disciples said, Master, might you have any idea of where you might have lost this key so our search could be more effective, right? Mm-hmm. Makes sense, right? Close to the house, farther away from the house. The master replied, of course I know where I lost the key. And they all looked at it and said, where? Well, I lost it in the house. They all exclaimed, what the hell are we doing out here looking for it in the grass? Mm-hmm. And the Sufi master says, is the answer to that obvious? And they said, no. He said, there's more light out here. There's more light out here. That's the problem that we all have had. We keep looking where there's more light. We want the easier, softer way. We want there to be more light, thinking that if there's more light out there, that's obvious the place where we're going to find it. And all of us have done that, right? Our emotional dependency, we call it our need for environmental support, right? Bill called it putting the cart before the horse. Isn't that what the Sufi master was talking about, right? Isn't that an impossible way of life? How long would they have been out in the grass looking for that key? I mean, for a long, long time. How many of us have been looking for the key in the grass because there's more light? Well, you quote this oftentimes, Herb, and I've always loved it when you said it. Bill said, this is very a simple program. It really is, is that we have to transcend our environmental support and start to develop the ability to support ourselves. That's what the whole directionality, if you will, of the purpose of the steps is about, right? To help us develop and find emotional sobriety. But Bill said, well, it's simple. A price must be paid. That means you're going to have to look where there might not be any light. You're going to have to stumble around a lot. Maybe even knock your head on the coffee table a few times, fall down the stairs, be stuck in one room and frustrated because you just can't seem to have enough light to even know where you're at, that you feel lost at times in all the darkness. But I think that the metaphor, I might have to join.
Yeah, we're not going. We're not going.
But it's a powerful one, because I think that there is such a tendency to want a quick solution to this stuff. How many people have we seen come into the program and they're gangbusters in the first 90 days, man? They're going to go. And then where do they go? The pain stops. What do you do when the pain stops? You keep going to meetings? Do you go because there's more possibilities, or do you go just because the pain's over? Is that that's just a good enough reason. I mean, that's one reason, but there's better reasons, right? We keep looking because there's something to look for. There's something to find. Herb, you put your finger on it. It's freedom. It's freedom is what we've been searching for. Is finding the key that unlocks that. I love Virginia Satir. She says it so well. We're all living in this emotional jail. And we're all begging other people, getting angry at other people, let me out, let me out. And, you and I have those pictures of the guy holding the bars, right? First of all, it's a close up and it looks like he's in jail, and then it's back, he's standing in the desert holding him up, and then we got another picture of the guy letting go. Said, finally, that's the release, Herb, that you were talking about. Let go of those bars. I do like what somebody said earlier tonight about that term self-renunciation that I used last time, because that is a serious problem for all of us here. And self-renunciation sometimes can be as simple as losing faith in our ability to grow. That's a form of self-renunciation. Losing faith in our ability to grow. The one thing that I've seen, and one of the miracles of life, whatever you want to call it, is that acorn becoming an oak tree. I still look at that and I can meditate on that for days and days and days. And there's so much to that image. And each one of us, we're that acorn, and we're growing into our own oak trees. And that's the exciting and challenging part of life. So thanks for a great discussion tonight.
Thank you. The
I just want to add one little thing to what you said, Alan, just there, because that's a big deal. Losing faith, and when you stop believing that you can do it, when you stop believing it's possible, I mean, that's pulling the plug on motivation. Just talk about getting stuck. And it's like it really is one of, I hadn't thought of it that way before, Alan, but I thought, no, that's actually one of the main ways we get stuck, is we stop believing it's possible.
Well, this is the paradox that we talk about in the program. We need to, Bill called our recovery is based upon a pedestal of hopelessness, right? What's
Right.
the hopelessness? The way I've been doing this isn't going to work.
Right.
Consciousness that's creating this is not going to get me out of it. Gurdjieff says, what put you to sleep is not going to wake you up. I mean, it's just not going to wake you up. We have to have a new experience. And that's where we discover a power greater than the false self that we've been relying on. And that's the exciting part. When that starts to happen, that's, I think, when faith starts to get restored. And we start to really, really celebrate, if you will, that recovery is about the discovery of new possibilities.
Well, it goes to what Herb was saying too, though, that the idea is I've come to the place where I can't do it. So you say, yeah, right, you can't do it. That's, you can't. It's and I'm acting like that's the end point. That's the beginning point. What you're saying, Herb, that's where you start. It's like by saying, I can't do this. No, you can't.
But see, everybody's so afraid of that declaration because then it's somehow going to throw us into non-existence.
Yeah. Acknowledging we can't do something and acknowledging we don't know something. It's just,
There's a lot of moving parts to this, and I've been doing now the workshops for over 30 years, and there's two things that I really am clear on. Number one is the majority of people don't make progress because they don't hear it from other people in terms of an experience, so they don't know that it's a possibility. I'm not blaming anybody, but I know that it took 5 years for me to hear somebody share an experience, and quite frankly, it's still an anomaly when they share actual experience that's practical and long term. Number one, people need a teacher and an accountability partner. Number two, it's absolutely now been replicated 30 years in a row that people start with a lot of energy, as Dr. Berger talked about, and they get some relief and some information and some freedom in steps 1, 2, and 3, and they hit the wall when they come to step 4. I lose 50% of the people who were very motivated to come, and they've been there for 3 months, and they drop out during the 4th step. Number one, it's really hard because it takes time. Number two, it's really hard because you got to look at yourself and see the truth, and it's not pretty. And so there's both things. There's not an attractive message being shared in any majority way. And number two, addicts especially, they want, as Tom said, they want the easier, softer way. And this is not, in the short term, the easier, softer way. In the long term, it's absolutely the easier, softer way. But you got to get beyond the short term to the long term and see in maybe embodied in some teacher the visible experience, so that's the tangible carrot that keeps drawing you forward. There's lots of moving parts here.
One of the things it just gelled for me, Herb, when you said that, is when you said they hit the 4th step, and you lose 50%. It's like, and I thought all of a sudden that's when people drop out of therapy too. When we put the fire out. And that's fine. Like everybody's saying, some people come to therapy to have the fire put out, and we're pretty good at doing that. But the people who stay, for one thing, they don't know they're staying for more pain, and we don't necessarily tell them that exactly when in the beginning. It's like, but I have a client who's right in the middle of that stuff too. But it's like, But people, when we start digging in, we say we got to look underneath this stuff. It's like, I'll just call you for the next appointment.
Yeah. Well, the quote that Alan gave us the first half of in the book, Bill Wilson, it's a brilliant summary of this process. In his own little story, he says, simple but not easy. A price has to be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness. We must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. That's it. We turn by self-destruction, meaning the false self, of course, the removal of the clouds in us that shade the light in us from us. It's all here.
Oh.
And it's just going to take some consciousness to acknowledge. That's why this emotional sobriety is so important, because it continues to address the impediments, the clouds in us. And it says it's an invitation. You're responsible for the quality of your life. Step up and grow up.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
what a great discussion tonight.
Hmm.
So, Tom, you're on for next week with this if you take the lead on forgiveness.
All right, I'll start preparing right now.
I know you. And if you need some help, just call Roger. He'll type out some stuff for you.
Is Roger okay?
I'll get Roger to write a sermon for me.
He will,
This thing-
Yeah, Roger's doing well. He's pretty hopeful at this point in time. So
Right.
the
Good.
possibilities have surfaced for him that he's excited about.
We do have a couple of people that with their hands raised.
All right, let's take a couple real quick. Let's bring Tom Potash back in, and if you want to make a comment before we bring them in, Tom, or just bring them in, whatever you feel like.
Yeah, well, I just want to add the one piece about the story you talked about looking for the keys is how many of his disciples or friends, or we call it society, were willing to look in the wrong place with him, right? There's very few, enlightened friends and people on the same path who will go, wait a second, let's not get lost here. Where's the source? So
I have a quick question. I usually have a hard time letting go because I have a lot of fear, and I'm worried if I let go, everything gonna come out of control. There will be a disaster, and then I cannot stay in sanity. So I better be in top of it. So that's a little hard for me to let go, but I'm learning one day at a time. I want to ask you, for letting go of my resentments, is it similar idea that it's hard for me to let go and forgive because I am worried that I'm not alarmed anymore to protect myself, and then they're gonna hurt me more. So I had just had that question. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really a good question. It's not about becoming vulnerable. It's about common sense also. And that's where sponsorship and step guide and or a good therapist and or a good attorney can help you depending on the level of the problem. But forgiveness is not about establishing a relationship. Forgiveness is not about endangering yourself. Forgiveness is just about releasing in you the attachment to your feelings of resentment, your feelings of anger, your feelings of blame. It's not exonerating anybody. It's not saying it was okay. It's not. But
it doesn't change the history. No, it doesn't change the history.
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just the releasing for me maybe is because if I release, they're gonna walk all over me.
Yeah,
So
well, that again, when you're in Al-Anon, they teach you how to
Yeah.
have your anchor deep in your own reality. That's what Dr. Berger talks about, keeping your center of gravity deep inside yourself, not placing it in other people, and not putting yourself in harm's way. And that's where you might need some objective person to help you navigate that.
That's right. I just want to add something quickly. The prayer of forgiveness that you taught us in the past, the person I had the most resent, and I was very, very, very uncomfortable around that person. I prayed and I don't have that feeling anymore. So it works.
I just wanted to say something. See, one of the things that I think is also true here is we generate a myth that we are controlling things.
Yeah, right.
It's and I think we do that because we're really trying to soothe our anxiety, when in reality, we're not controlling anything.
Right.
Even though we may fool ourselves, deceive ourselves into thinking we are, because see, we don't want to feel powerless. And so what we do to avoid these feelings of powerless is we make up. This is very common when someone has experienced a trauma and somebody has done something to them, this thought that, oh, if I would have done this, I wouldn't have been raped. Or if I would have done this, my dad wouldn't have hit me. If I just if I wouldn't been a smart aleck that one day, he wouldn't have knocked my teeth out, right? See, we generate these theories that, my God, I could have done something to prevent what was happening. But see, I think we do that because we're searching for the key in the wrong spot. You see, instead of looking at how to deal with whatever we experience in life, we look at trying to avoid the experience. How could I have prevented that rather than dealt with it? How can I deal with this pain? How can I deal with the disappointment? How can I deal with my fears? How can I deal with my awfulizing about this situation? And see, I think that gets down to more of the reality of the issue.
That's right.
And that was the insight Bill had. He realized we had the cart before the horse. If I think I'm controlling everything and then I'm gonna dictate to you and write a script that you've got to follow, right? He talks about we're the actor thinking we're the director. Isn't that a great analogy? I mean, think about it for a minute. I'm living this life, but somehow I'm acting like I'm directing it for everybody. Wow, talk about a delusion. I mean,
Well, that's why in a few more pages, he says we have to quit playing God.
that's
Yeah.
it.
That's the role there, right?
And I
Yeah.
play God because I don't trust myself to deal with what's going on. See, that comes back to what I said before. This self-renunciation is a renunciation of faith that I can somehow cope with whatever is going to happen to me in my life.
Mhm.
Yeah, the other quote that's great from Bill is he not the victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages well? And there it is again. It's that if I can get happiness if I can just and what did Herb tell us? It's
Release.
opening the hands.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. The people who I have most resent to, I make bigger God out of them.